We definitely need a food policy. We need a food policy even more than we need a farm bill, because everybody eats. I personally believe strongly in the right to food, that everyone should be provided by government with the means to achieve a healthy diet, adequate food and nutrition. Not that the government should be setting up free farm stands on every corner and handing out food, but it's the government's responsibility to ensure that people have livable wages so that they can buy the food they need, access to farmland so that they can raise crops if that's what they need. We need to have that food policy grounded in democratic governance. And that's probably the other thing, in addition to the right to food, that I've worked most on in my profession, of how you can achieve democratic governance, what that means. I'm working with several other people about it. And I'm impressed with what folks have done in some other countries to pull together a people-centered food bill, like Australia is one country that's done that. Canada, Food Secure Canada was behind this. Resetting the Table is the name of it. That's their people's food policy. And they have endorsed in that people's food policy indigenous rights, the right to food, food sovereignty, a lot of things that our government won't even let us talk about, much less actually have represented in our policy. But I think if people understood what these terms mean, the right to food, if they understood that it's a little bit like the right to public education, that the right to food is something that the government should be responsible for because there are systemic barriers to respecting, protecting, and fulfilling food rights. And if the government's not involved in addressing those barriers, it's impossible for individuals to deal with them on their own. So right to food and democratic governance would be the two places where I really come down. I was so impressed when I learned about the Conselho system in Brazil, where civil society and other actors in the food system work together at multiple levels, and those levels feed into each other. Many municipalities have conselhos, and then they work up to the state level and the national level, and at each level there's a group of actors who work together with a civil society chair. That's a person from social movements like the MST, good example of a social movement that's active in Brazil, or La Via Campesina, or NGOs that are very active in fighting for reform of the food system. They are helping to chair this group. We've just got to switch to a more democratic, people-centered input to our farm and food bills. One thing that's absolutely necessary is to have in place ways to balance power. If you bring everybody to the table, what will happen is that the people who already have power will succeed in getting things passed by that group that conserve their power. It's not going to threaten the existing power arrangements. So you need to have safeguards in there that make it possible for the marginalized people, minorities, to speak freely without repercussions. Sometimes that means just having a certain number of people in the room, and some people have said it's got to be at least 30%, that if you don't have 30% marginalized people, you can't have tokenism. You can't have one person representing labor sitting at a table with a bunch of CEOs or vice presidents from big food companies. It's just, it won't work. Anybody would be intimidated if they were completely outnumbered and realized that whatever they say might be distorted, it might not be heard, and that's one of the other dynamics, that marginalized people can say very clearly what they need and want, but it simply won't be heard. It won't be recorded. It won't show up in the final report. When you ask for democratic governance and when you say that we need more of that, there's a bit of a leap of faith. You're saying that if people do have equal voice, and if marginalized people are really given the same right to speak, right to be heard that other people have, that you will come out with the best decisions for the group. And I know that sounds a little bit like the invisible hand of the market, that if everybody's working for themselves, somehow the market, for their own rational self-interest, somehow the market will make all this work out to be the best. But political voice is very different from market choice. And when you do have real distributed political voice, then you do have better decisions being made, decisions that aren't overwhelmed by the people who have market power, who have assumed political power in our country. I think people in this country have few models of real living democracy, and the more that we can participate in those models ourselves, create them, make them thrive in whatever ways we have to be doing that in every municipality, in every state.